And good evening, everybody. Welcome to Branco Broadcast. I am Bob Branco. We're pleased to have back for a second appearance on our show author Steve Roberts. He wrote a book called The Whys and Whats of Weather, and we asked him to come back on the show to talk about a very hot topic that a lot of the politicians seem to thrive on, and that's global warming. And he can get into other topics as well. In fact, he's working on a second book, too. Welcome to the program, Stephen.
Well, thank you for having me, Bob.
So you can just give us a brief background, and then we can ask you questions.
My name's Stephen Roberts. I'm a weather science writer. I was a contributor to the Lowell Sun, WCAT radio for 10 years. I worked at the Talking Information Center Radio Reading Network as a weather analyst for 17 years. I wrote The Whys and Whats of Weather. I am almost finished Snow Bombs, Winter's Hurricanes, and I am working on and will soon complete a book called Hurricane Watch, Preparing for the Greatest Storms on Earth. So I know quite a bit about global warming, so if you would like to get into it, I'm all ears, and I will give you all that I have.
Well, let me first make a comment, Steve, and we have plenty of time for everybody to talk to you. I don't believe we have global warming. I think the Earth goes through cycles. I think politicians like to jump at things to try to come up with ways that they feel are going to help the situation, and then they'll look for credit or blame for what's causing our atmosphere to do what it does. Our atmosphere does what it does because it does what it does. It's nothing trendy, I don't think. I mean, we had an ice age a while ago, and before that we had warm weather. I just feel that the Earth goes in cycles. Now, if you have knowledge that challenges this, I will be more than welcome to hear it and understand it, too.
Okay. The Earth has gone through rhythms of fire and ice. The rhythm to which you speak is called the Glacial Interglacial cycle, and that's perfectly fine. You have to understand something. We should be heading for a new ice age right now, and the world is warming. The climate is moving in the opposite direction to which it would be headed were it operating under its own devices. The Arctic is warming at a breakneck pace. Sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic, Pacific, Indian, and Arctic oceans are very, very warm. The oceans around the world are very, very warm generally. And all of this is indicative of anthropogenic climate change. Anthropogenic meaning that it is caused by anthropods, human beings. So we are indeed forcing the hand of climate, and we are doing so in a way that will be profoundly impactful going forward. So there's my rebuttal to your say. Politicians are divided. You know, the Democrats would love nothing more than to do something about it, and the Republicans are saying, no, everything is fine, there's no problem. So in some ways, that it's an ideologically based political divide. The liberals say yay and the conservatives say nay, and that's very basically how this battle is divided. Are there any questions?
Yes, to the skeptics, I say stand back about 3 feet and take a good look, because in my view, global warming is occurring. For the first time, there was a cruise ship from Alaska going through the Arctic Sea, coming down the Atlantic and actually docked in New York in September 13. The amount of ice melt in the Arctic has altered greatly the Inuit hunting and fishing grounds. The amount of permafrost in the Arctic area that is melting surfacely is giving off a great deal of methane, which also aids and abets the heating of the atmosphere and the oceans. Just in Florida alone, with the water depth of the oceans now because of the ice melt, when the tides come in, South Florida and along the Tamiana Trail and around the Everglades, water is increasing from 2 to 6 feet. $1 million condominiums that people have bought, they are underwater up to 2 to 6 feet. When the tide comes in, the amount of salt water that's actually permeating into the Everglades because of this. Many of the archipelago in the islands in the Pacific are underwater. You mark my words, within 10 to 20 plus years, many of the coastal areas of the United States are going to have to move because of flooding. Do you agree, Steve?
I concur. Another thing that we need to be mindful of is that we're moving to the disappearing shores in incredible numbers. So it'll be very interesting to see how this sort of boom in population responds to the rise in the seas. So
and Florida, a case of point, has a very low altitude. I mean, it's almost at water level. So as the ocean rises, the underwater table also rises, and houses are being flooded. All the infrastructure in Florida is virtually in jeopardy right now. South Florida, none of the politicians want to even admit that there's a problem, and yet they're going to be paying out billions and billions of dollars just to learn how to tread water.
Yeah, denial ain't just a river in Egypt, is it?
No.
And it's unfortunately, we need to be very serious about this problem because weather's becoming more extreme. We're seeing more rain. We're seeing more snow. We're in a drought, and I want to discuss this because this is our corner of the world. Drought often ends dramatically, and if you look at climate change, weather is becoming more extreme. It's drier when it is dry. It is wetter when it is wet. And unfortunately, when this drought ends, the odds are pretty good. I would say 85, 90%. That it will end in a resounding way. We will see flooding. We will see a series of big rainstorms. And if it ends in the fall, we're in even bigger trouble because the waters of the Atlantic are still very warm from the summer, and nor'easters that impact our area during the autumnal months tend to slow down and even stall out for days. So that means when it rains, the potential exists for it to rain for 2, 3, 4, even 5 days in a row.
Wow.
That is not a good thing. So, and in the dynamic volatile era, which is an idea that I've posited in the Wise and What's of Weather, weather will become more dynamic. That is to say, it will be more energetic and more volatile. That is to say, more unstable. So we are energizing and destabilizing the weather at the same time. And that, unfortunately, means that we are moving inexorably toward chaos. And that is not a good thing if you want to live on a world that is as habitable and cool and comfortable as our world is now.
Steve.
Yes.
Yes, hi. This is Don from Central Mass. Now, this is a subject I know that I'm well versed on. I agree with both Bob and Alan. The Earth is warming. There's no denying that, okay? The effects are very apparent. And methane is a powerful force. But if we have a great amount of methane burps, as they call them, but I also believe that CO2, carbon dioxide, is not the cause. Now, I had heard from many experts that back in prehistoric time, when these multi-ton creatures were roaming the Earth, the atmosphere had vast amounts of CO2. And we didn't have smokestacks or cars and trucks in that era. And like Bob said, we fluctuate from warm to major ice ages, to mini ice ages and all that. So I do agree with climate change. I just don't think that CO2 is the cause.
Well, when the dinosaurs were romping around the world,
yes.
the sun was weaker than it is now, and even at its weaker state, the Earth was about 10 to 15 degrees Celsius warmer than it is today.
Okay? Yes, I guess it was. Yes.
And it was the CO2 trapped a lower amount of solar radiation that was being inputted to the Earth than it will today. So the increased power of the sun, believe it or not, makes us more vulnerable to compositional warming, such as the introduction of greenhouse gases, which modify the composition of the atmosphere. So we are more vulnerable to compositional warming because of the stronger sun. And unfortunately, when we add this CO2, we are going to find ourselves dealing with a world that undergoes very, very fast changes. I want to just talk a little bit about the weather and the climate.
Before you do, I have two questions about what you just said. If the Earth was 15 degrees Celsius warmer in the dinosaur era, and if man is contributing to global warming, then why was it 15 degrees warmer in the dinosaur age?
Yes.
Because the amount of carbon dioxide and methane released into the atmosphere was much higher. The dinosaurs liberated a lot. Volcanoes were liberated a lot. The breakdown of organic matter in soils also resulted in the release of carbon dioxide through microbiotic activity that was found in the fecal matter of these monsters of the past.
And if the sun was weaker, go ahead, continue.
And all of that greenhouse gas was permeating the atmosphere that was being bathed in the weaker but still impactful light of the incipient sun.
And if the sun was weaker back then, what made it stronger now?
There are processes that are inherent to the physics of the sun that causes radiant output to increase about 0.5 to 1% every 100 years. So the sun was about 3% less intense at the time of the dinosaurs. And that doesn't sound like an awful lot. But if we increase the sun's output by 3% in the next 10 years, the extent to which the Earth warmed as a function of that increase would be greater than the extent to which the Earth would warm as a result of the CO2 double climate. So, the increase in the sun's output has actually created significant changes in climate, even during the periods of ice ages. It's probably warmer than it would have been during the glacial epochs that might have happened, hundreds of millions of years ago. So, you have another question, Bob? Go ahead.
No, I'm all set, so you can talk about what you were going to say.
Weather is going to become more extreme. When it rains, it will rain harder. The storms that impact us will move slower. We're also seeing areas of high pressure become bigger, stronger, and more blocking. Hurricane Hermine moved up the East Coast, and there was some talk for quite a while of this storm sort of stalling to the east of New Jersey or south of Cape Cod for days. Well, we may one day see a nor'easter, a snow bomb, that sits off New Jersey and stalls like the blizzard of 78, only this won't stall for a day. It'll stall for 2 or 3 or even 4. And when that happens, it will snow very heavily, and you will see snow that may be measured in depths of yards, not feet. I call it the Great Winter Hurricane. So believe it or not, global warming may bring about an increase in snow. When it snows really hard. When it doesn't snow at all. It'll be an all-or-nothing dynamic. So weather is going to be all over the place.
Also, along with that, the president of Dartmouth went back, and he's been studying the Arctic over the last 20 years and has various meters, various weather stations, and all kinds of other devices to look at climatic change in the Arctic. He went back this summer, and he is amazed at the degradation that's taking place and the amount of water that's being produced and the icebergs that are floating further and further south into the shipping lanes. And you may even see more accidents or even some ships catching it on the chin. But the depth of water in the Arctic and the temperature in the Arctic is such that many of the marine life are swimming and staying cold and actually heading towards Antarctica, and even Antarctica at the South Pole is melting as well. It is a real problem that a lot of skeptics do not want to admit that's occurring.
It really
and yet science is proving them wrong. They just look at the scientific data will prove them wrong. Yes, there are cyclical patterns of the Earth, that the Earth does this, that, and the other on 7, 11, 22-year cycles and so forth. But those are not the cycles that we're talking about.
No, they aren't. This is something that is totally out of phase with any process that is ongoing in climate. Is Karen Bureau there? I thought I heard her talk earlier.
Karen Crowder is here.
I'm sorry, Karen Crowder. I apologize. I've got my Karens messed up. Karen, you had a question earlier. Go ahead.
Yes, I had a question, a couple of them actually. I read a couple of books recently. One, and I don't know the author at the moment, Unstoppable Global Warming, and this guy says it's cyclical, and that back in the Middle Ages, from the 9th century to the 13th century, we had quite a bit of global warming, and there was a lot of prosperity, and there's probably a lot we don't know. But
that's right.
And then he said that there was this little ice age that came about.
Yep.
And
okay,
I've looked at different websites that's saying we're going to an ice age. Granted, I was looking at them a couple of years ago, and we had one of the coldest winters I can remember.
Yep. Okay. Well, let me
split when it was cold.
Yep. Well, let me split this.
If anything, the winters are getting colder, but I don't know what to think anymore after this year. I really don't.
Well, you know what? That's fine. Okay, the first bit you discussed talks about the medieval warm period, which occurred from about 900 to 1300. That was followed by the Little Ice Age, which occurred from about 1400 to 1800, 1850. So, yes, they prospered in the medieval warm period, and they struggled in the Little Ice Age. Now, are we heading for an ice age? Well, there's some conjecture out there, and it's pretty solid conjecture, too, that as the ice melts, the land on which it rests will rise, and that would increase seismicity, earthquake activity. And earthquakes will lead to potential tsunamis, and this also may cause volcanoes to erupt, like the ones in Iceland. And if those volcanoes erupt in enough numbers or in vigor, we could see a global winter that would be very persistent and perhaps even induce a glacial epoch that would last not as long as a typical ice age, perhaps, but perhaps hundreds of years. So it is possible that climate change could bring about a paradoxical cooling, and if we burn fossil fuels during that, the Earth would warm a lot once the skies cleared and the sun returned to its normal power. So there's no escaping global warming. Even the volcanic increases that may result from geologic destabilization will not stop global warming. They will simply slow it down or bring temporary pause to the process.
Yeah, another thing another thing that, while I think of it, that brings about the scientific evidence of climate change, if you were to take core samples of the Earth and you look at the amount of pollen and the various strata of soils, you will see that Vermont, for instance, at one time had black gum, mountain laurel, many of the type of vegetation that made this into a tropical area or subtropical. You also see by looking at the rings on trees, you also see by various and sundry other scientific evidence how climate has affect the region and when we live, even the types of trees and so forth, and it does not coincide with the cyclical patterns that you're speaking of.
Yep. The climate is changing. It is changing at the hands of man. The records that you speak are called proxy records. Proxy records are records that are left by the Earth's geology, herbology, and these records can be very telling. You can look at ice cores in the Arctic and Antarctic. You can look at coral reefs in the Pacific, seafloor sediment, and all of these tell a story. We live on a rotating diary that quite literally tells us the history of Earth's past climate, going back hundreds, even thousands of years. So I like your analysis and your bringing up of the processes that we can see through.
Well, I teach climatology through geography in the physical environment, so I'm well familiar with the data and the field work that we do here in Vermont in order to help graduate students towards their pile high and deep degree.
Yep. Wow, that's a good thing. Yes, that is very good.
Don, you had a question.
Yes, a question and a very brief comment. Yeah, I've also heard that when our solar cycles, which go like every, I think, 11 years, when the sun is at its maximum, it shoots out the solar flares, and when it's at a minimum, that tends to somewhat cool the atmosphere, but when we're at a solar minimum, is that?
That is true. That is
yes.
correct, yep. Yes. The sunspots are dark spots on the sun that
yes.
in some ways literally disrupt the flow of its energy out to the Earth. When the sun doesn't have sunspots, when the sun doesn't have sunspots, there's no disruption to the flow of energy that is being sent out to Earth and other planets in the solar system. So therefore, we have an increase in temperature, which causes climate change that is consonant with that.
Yes, and those sunspots also energize the ionosphere, which also acts on our radio waves, television waves, but it also directly affects climate.
That is correct. Yes. So, the sun warms the ground and the ground warms the air. There are other aspects. There are impacts that sunspots have on drought in the central United States, portions of Africa. There are impacts that drought even has on the flow of the jet stream. When the sunspot cycle is higher, what happens is the tropics receive more solar radiation and are warmed to a slightly greater extent, and this causes an increase in the pole to tropical temperature disparity, which causes the jet stream to flow faster. When the sun's output decreases, the tropics are cooled a little bit, and this causes less discontinuity in the temperature between the equator and tropics, and those airflows, they slow down and the jet stream meanders to the north and south, and we tend to see a lot of trophiness in the jet stream in Central and Eastern North America. So that's a study that was undertaken by Dr. Todd Crawford of the Weather Company. So he knows his stuff upside one side and down the other.
Here's the all-important question, though, Steve. What do you think is the biggest contributor to climate change, the sun or man?
Man, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
So is there any truth to what the Democrats are saying that we could actually do something about it as men and women?
Yeah, absolutely. We can do something about it.
Could you tell us some of the things we could do about it?
Oh, look, we are moving inexorably toward a green economy. And a green economy, such as the wind turbines, home solar. I just saw something the other day about tidal power, and they say that in the next 10 to 20 years, it will be competitive with fossil fuels and may run as many as 25% of the homes in the United States. There's the potential for all sorts of incredible things coming down the pike. I call it the green wave, and in the book I'm going to write a chapter called Considering the Coming Green Wave. And very basically, the green wave is an environmental economic model that fosters economic prosperity and facilitates a greener world for us all. We often think that a good economy and a clean green world are mutually exclusive concepts, and they are not. You can have a green world and a green economy at the same time. It is not one or the other. You can have both at the same time. It is possible. And the technological means have come a long, long way in the last 7 or 8 years. 7 or 8 years ago, I would have been laughed at had I discussed the idea of a green wave. But now the whole paradigm is shifting so quickly that we can actually have a green wave economy that will run our world, and we can sequester carbon dioxide. There are all sorts of technologies. There's a weathering process where you take rocks and you put them into these plants that are at the coast, and you spin them around to expedite weathering, which in turn increases the uptake of carbon dioxide, which would sequester enough CO2 to offset our emissions. We would need about 700 of those plants worldwide, but it could be done. We also can sequester CO2 simply by making the soil beneath our feet healthier. Healthy soil will take 3 times more CO2 than the trees that are planted in it. So there are a lot of things that we can do to quite literally erase our carbon footprint and not be the Yeti-Petties that we are. And that's the organic Yeti-Petties that we are. And that's what we really need to be mindful of going forward here. We can fix the problem that we find ourselves in. It is not too late to fix this problem.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Yes, Steve. One question I've got, and maybe it's because I live up here in Central Mass, I don't know, but in the past, I'd say 10 years, I've seen more than that. I've seen more really, really cold winters.
Yep.
You know, where the cold begins in December, like in 2014. It began getting cold and snowy in December, and we didn't see much of a spring at all.
Yep.
I don't think.
Correct.
And I thought, if anything, these people with global warming, everything seems to be getting cooler. And even the year before that, we had a lot of snow into mid-March.
Yep.
And, you know, then all of a sudden in June we had a heat wave, but we had an early winter in 2014. And 2015 was kind of quirky with all the snow we got.
Yep.
And I thought, oh, maybe this is, you know, you were hearing things like we're going to have bitterly cold winters, and didn't happen this year. It was very mild.
Yep. Well, let me explain that. As the Earth warms, the Arctic leads the way, okay?
Uh-huh.
And as the Arctic warms, the temperature disparity between the Arctic and the equator is reduced. this causes the jet stream to slow, and when the jet stream slows, it meanders to the north, creating ridges, and it meanders to the south, creating troughs, and you see this wavy jet stream around the northern hemisphere. Well, if you are under a trough, it is very warm, and if you are under a ridge, it is very, very cold. And the ridge that was in the west stayed there, and the trough that was in the east stayed here. And this is why we had cold winters and summers that were nothing shy of ho-hum. They were almost like glorified thermal autumns. You know, the last couple of Julys were like toasty Septembers, or slightly warmer than normal Septembers. And that's why, because we were in a trough that was actually a product of a slower jet stream that was caused by climate change. So it's one of those things where you look at it and there are a lot of counterintuitive aspects.
Steve, explain also, which affects this as well, is that North Atlantic Oscillation versus El Nino out in the west.
The North Atlantic Oscillation, wow, you are knowledgeable. In the North Atlantic Oscillation, what happens is we see negative and positive phases. The negative oscillation occurs when the Icelandic low and the Bermuda Azores high are weak. When this happens, the jet stream tends to ride into Canada, and much of the United States is warmer than it should be. When the Bermuda high and Icelandic low are strong, the NAO is positive. And the positive NAO, the negative NAO allows for troughiness in the central and eastern U.S., and then positive NAO actually allows for the United States and Europe to be warmer than usual. So I'm sorry about that. Yes. Now, the North Atlantic Oscillation is very, very important to the weather that we have here. El Nino is less important to the weather we have here. In some ways, El Nino goes with whatever is in vogue in the east. If there is going to be a cold winter in the east due to the NAO, then El Nino will make it colder and snowier. If the NAO is going to make it warmer in the central and eastern United States, then the El Nino process will only make it even warmer. So El Nino in some ways plays to whatever is climatologically in vogue in the east. Does that answer your question?
Why do you suppose... Go ahead, Alan.
Huh?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yes, I'm familiar with it. I was just going to have you clarify it to show the temperature differentials from season to season or winter to winter based on that oscillation.
Yep, when it's negative, it's cold and snowy in the east. When it's positive, it's warmer and sunny. So when the NAO is negative, the weather and temperature are negative. When the NAO is positive, the weather and temperature tend to be positive in Central and Eastern North America. Yep.
Steve, why do you suppose we're having this drought here in the Northeast like there hasn't been in a long time?
Oh, my goodness. Let me just say that there's been a big ridge in the east, and that the ridge sort of peaks at about New Jersey, and we're getting cool, dry air that comes out of central and eastern Canada. And because the air is coming out of Canada, it doesn't have a lot of moisture to be infused with. Even the Great Lakes won't infuse the moisture that comes into New England with much. So the air is very, very dry. And when you blow dry air over vegetation, you sap that vegetation out of its moisture. And even with the cooler temperatures of autumn, the windy days that occur will offset any decrease in temperature because wind enhances evaporation. And therefore, even if this pattern doesn't break until midwinter or late winter, we are faced with a drought that will probably become worse and worse with time.
Touch a little bit on the adiabatic rate of cooling, Steve. That will also describe it. As the warm, moist air hits a cold air mass, the warm air rises and cools at a rate of 3.14 degrees per 1,000 feet, which also leaves precipitation elsewhere and evaporates any moisture that's here.
Yeah, as air rises, it expands. As it expands, it cools. Well, a lot of this summer, we've had what's called a capped atmosphere. The air is warmer upstairs than it is downstairs. When air rises into warm air, there's no impetus for the production of rain because there's no mechanism to facilitate the production of rain, the condensation of liquid. And because it has been so warm upstairs, we really can't get thunderstorms to go. And when they do go, they go, but they're very brief in nature, and they produce very heavy rain that in some ways is of little use to the environment. We call it the wet and dry adiabatic lapse rate. The wet adiabatic lapse rate is the result of ascending air that condenses and precipitates. The dry adiabatic lapse rate is the product of air that sinks, compresses, and heats up like you would heat a bicycle tire. That air compressionally heats, it dries, its relative humidity decreases, and you get drying effect. So how did I do with that one, Alan?
Very good. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Yep.
You go to the head of the class and you get a gold star for the week.
Oh, thank you very much. That means a lot coming from you.
Don, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Steve, the NAO, the North Atlantic Oscillation, is that the same thing as the Greenland block?
That's a great question. The Greenland block often coincides with a negative NAO. That's a really good question. Yeah, you get a big ridge in the Atlantic, and that keeps Greenland very warm. You get a trough in eastern North America, and yes, there is a linkage between a negative NAO and a Greenland block. They often, but do not always coincide. Yes.
Yeah, I heard that. On one of my weather channels. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, during the Greenland block, but we've had very snowy winters.
That's right. A Greenland block is often conducive to the development of big nor'easters down in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yes,
They move up the Atlantic coast, and they can hit us really hard with 12 to 20 inches of snow or 20 to 30 inches of snow.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So these are very, very, very interesting patterns. As the jet stream slows and becomes more wavy, believe it or not, we are going to see more Greenland blocks. But we will also see winters where it is decidedly warmer than normal. It's what I call the all-or-nothing atmosphere. When the atmosphere wants to raise the devil, it will do so. And when it wants to sort of cool its heels, it will do so too. And that's the nature and complexion of extreme weather as a result of climate change.
Well, let me tell you, Steve, I hope you're wrong about this drought continuing, because if we're at level 3 right now. If we go to level 4, at least the city of Worcester, Mass, will have to start temporarily shutting water off during the day, but for like a few hours at a time. I mean, we desperately need rain so badly.
Well, I'll tell you, we got some rain coming tonight and tomorrow. That'll be about a half inch to an inch. And then there's the potential for a more protracted rainfall, which will start sometime Friday afternoon and go through Saturday and maybe even into Sunday of this weekend. I know you don't want rain on the weekend, but in some ways it's the devil that you need right now. And
I'll take it any way I can get it.
I'll take it.
The television weathermen said that they're not really sure about this coming weekend, but they said it could be a very light rain. I hope we can get an appreciable rain.
There's something I want to talk to you about pursuant to the drought. This is going to be in the weather news over the next 10, 12, 15 days. There is a tropical cyclone that is getting its act together about 700 miles to the east of the Windward Islands. It will be Matthew.
You're right, Bob. Yeah, I just heard that today. Yeah.
It is a very big system, and if it moves into the Gulf, it might move into the eastern United States, and it might link up with a front, or it might link up with a non-tropical system, and it's possible that Matthew, in another 2.5 weeks, could give us much needed rainfall. Unfortunately, the kind of precipitation that this slobbering sea monster could deliver might be truly copious and might be too much of a good thing too fast. So, but yeah, I think that all eyes should be on the tropics over the next 10, 12, 15 days.
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, it's either feast or famine, you know.
Oh, yes, and this sea monster is going to feast on our peace of mind, unfortunately.
Yeah.
There's something else I'd like to say before we call this off here. And, you know, we've had it really good for the last 70 years. And, you know, we don't know how bad things could be. We have no idea. The United States hasn't incurred the wrath of many hurricanes in the last 10 years. And even over the last 50 years, there's been a great dearth in landfalls. You know, eventually all of this is going to change, and we will see Mother Nature at her worst, even if we do nothing to tick her off. So there are a lot of things that you know, we need to be mindful of. Weather is becoming more extreme. You know, we're going to see more Sandys, in my opinion. We're going to see more superstorms like the superstorm of '93. And there are a lot of things that we're going to see that probably can't even be imagined. We are facing a future of historic weather. And that means we're going to see 100-year, 500-year, 1,000-year events. We're seeing 1,000-year rainfall events. And we're going to see more of them as time goes on, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's Mother Nature.
That's exactly right. And that's unfortunately how the cookie crumbles.
Yeah, so. It is interesting, Steve, just very quickly. It is interesting how global warming, as a paradox, could cause an ice age. But I've heard that in the past.
Yes, I mean, there are some ideas that still contend increased cloudiness would block out the sun and cool the world. That idea has lost a lot of favor with scientists, but the idea of volcanism increasing, we could see a volcanic winter that lasted for decades or longer if we had a sustained period of volcanic activity. You know, if you had 7 or 8 Mount Pinatubo's erupting at the same time, you could see a significant decrease in planetary temperature that would last for 3 or 4 years after those volcanoes erupted. And if we saw 4 or 5 such volcanoes erupt every decade for the next 70 years, you know, you'd be talking about a lifetime or longer worth of very, very, very cold weather. And that's the kind of thing that we need to see.
That undersea volcanoes are very, very numerous. But the sea floor is loaded with volcanoes that haven't been active for many, many years.
And there seems to be an increase in undersea volcanic activity, which, believe it or not, might actually contribute some to sea surface temperature rise. If that heat rises to the surface, you know, might the oceans warm to a greater extent than greenhouse gas emissions could explain. And if that happened, what would the implications of that be for weather?
Oh, I know.
So there are a lot of complexities that we need to deal with as we work our way into the next several decades and beyond. We are, as I've said before, in an extreme regime. A little global warming will go a long way in making weather more extreme. A little global warming will create a disproportionately large increase in extreme weather. So in another 15 years, when we've warmed the Earth about 0.25 degrees, 0.3 C, that seemingly small rise in temperature might yield a very large or disproportionately large increase in the frequency and magnitude of extreme weather events. And that's unfortunate because the last thing we need is for, 500-year weather events to become the new norm.
No.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
That'd be awful.
Steve, how cold was it during our ice age in the Renaissance era?
The last ice age was about 5 degrees Celsius cooler on a global scale. Did I just hear Dorothy Donovan?
You did. I don't think I registered on the conference itself.
So
hi, Johnny. This is Karen.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yep.
Yeah,
oh,
I can
okay.
hear you.
I didn't think I could say anything because I wasn't sure if I was part of it.
You have the floor, Dorothy. Go right ahead.
Oh, I just think that we are turning into an all-or-nothing atmosphere and extremes, and I really think we're going to have to do something about it.
I think we will have to, but it's one of those things, is the will there to do things. I think the will is there. There are a lot of things that people don't necessarily think about. You go to Walmart and you buy a furry blanket to keep warm in the winter. People don't realize it, but that blanket warmed the world before it will ever warm you. You buy furry fun socks or bedroom slippers, and, those bedroom slippers have established a carbon footprint before they will ever see your footprint. The greenhouse provocation exists in everything that we have and use. The hammer that you use has a carbon footprint. The tiles beneath your feet have a carbon footprint. The roof shingles above your head have a carbon footprint. Everything we have took energy to make. And so in some ways, we really need to think about what we do and what it means and what we have and what it entails in productive terms. Are there any other questions?
Why don't you tell us where we can find you? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, with this global warming, the Köppen classification of climate is changing to the point that it's all in the process now of being reclassified, because what used to hold true at various latitudes and longitudes no longer holds true with Köppen.
That's true. You can get the whys and whats of weather at Dvorkin.com/Stephen P. Roberts, and that's DVORKIN.com/Stephen with a V, P as in Paul, and Roberts as in like Nora Roberts. So there you have it. You can also get my novel, The Great Winter Hurricane, and in The Great Winter Hurricane, weather forecasters call for a storm to dump 6 to 10 feet of snow on the Northeast, inspiring the children of Boston's mayor and the Massachusetts governor to run away from the comfort and safety of their fine homes, to frolic in the frost of the greatest gale New England has ever known. So that's a truly awesome story. And at the end, I actually explain how climate change could create the Great Winter Hurricane and make it happen for the Northeast U.S.
Well, thank you for that information.
You're welcome.
Steve, if you would remain after Bob closes the conference, I have something I need to ask you.
Oh, okay.
Are there any more questions before we conclude?
Yes, I have a question for one more question. Yeah, do you think if the global warming increases, and this is probably inevitable, to have longer, hotter summers like this one?
Oh, absolutely. If the global warming process continues, we're going to see more 90-degree days. There are some forecasts that contend that as the Earth warms, and we'll see more 90 and 100-degree days.
Oh.
Boston, for instance, by the year 2100 could see as many as 63 90-degree days a year on average.
In the Northeast, you mean, or just all around?
Boston could see 63 90-degree plus days or hotter days a year on average by 2100 if we're not careful, according to some studies. That's pretty scary.
I guess it is.
I like 90 degrees some, but 53 days?
63.
Yeah, that's a few days too many.
That's a lot of days. That's 9 weeks. That's 9 weeks of 90-degree heat.
Ugh.
That's pretty darn hot.
Yeah,
that's
awful.
awful.
We won't be around in 2100.
No, but you know what? The process
Yeah, but our grandkids will. Our great-grandkids will.
Yeah.
But you know what? The whole process is cumulative. If the world warms 4 degrees, it has to warm 2.1 degrees, 2.5 degrees first. If the world warms 3 degrees, it's going to warm 1 and 2 degrees. So, and we, most scientists will tell us that, we basically have to, hold on for a minute. We basically have to keep 80% of all of the stored carbon in the ground if we had to create a future that is salvageable. If we burn any more than that, then we are going to warm the world too much, and processes like feedback loops will take things to the next level, and it will become an unstoppable issue that we must contend with for the next several thousand or more years. That is
well, big oil, Steve, big oil is not going to go away willingly. They're going to hang on as long as they can.
Yes, they will. And unfortunately, hanging on for as long as they can is not a particularly good thing for us.
No.
But there are things that we need to be mindful of. And unfortunately, that's just the nature and complexion of this problem. We are a nation of consumer hungry people. We work doggedly to make ends meet, but what we fail to realize is that the gas that allows us to go from A to B or warm our houses, is doing us in. And those problems will unfortunately, be our lot in life for a good long time.
Well, we need to concentrate more on public transportation and, kinds of public transportation that will be greener.
Yep, and there are actually moves there. The T is actually going to use fuel cell automobiles in the next couple of years. They're getting a fleet of like 40 of them. And the T is going to get far more of them even after that. Eventually, the T will phase out fossil fuels. And there are a lot of public transportation systems around the United States that are going to do that as well. So that's the long and the short of it. The seas are rising, ice is shrinking. Certain places like California are becoming drier. This drought, I don't think, will be anything as bad as California's. But when it ends,
this drought has lasted a few years now.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
It'll end in California as well. They'll get heavy rain, and when it rains in California, it will rain ever lovingly. It will snow ever lovingly, and the drought will end for a while, and then it will recur. It's like that here too. We'll see this drought end. It will be nice for a while. Then we'll see another drought, and the drought will end in flood. And that's what it is. We're going to go from drought to deluge. It's an all or nothing dynamic, as Dorothy said.
Well, if there are no more questions, I would like to thank you once again, Steve, for being on the show, offering your wisdom on weather knowledge and sharing it with us. And hopefully we will abide by what needs to be done in order to at least slow the climate change down, and then to get it to a point where it's sustainable for us to live.
That is correct.
Well, thank you again.
You're welcome. And Ellen,
it's been a pleasure having you, Steve.
Thank you.
Pleasure talking to you again.
Well,
Take care.
Talking to you too, Karen.